In 2013, we witnessed one of the greatest title fights in UFC history.
Oh, big combination by Gustafsson. Gustafsson is hurt. Gustafsson's busted up now. Incredible fight.
Now, in a rematch, 5 years in the making, John Bones Jones returns to the octagon to face Alexander the Mauler Gustafsson one more time.
Here we go!
After becoming the youngest ever UFC champion, John Jones went on a record-breaking run of title defences that saw him dominate the 205-pound division for 4 years.
And what a huge, huge victory for John Jones!
Sweden's Gustafsson had an equally impressive rise up the rankings, which put him on a collision course with the champ, and his first title shot came at UFC 165. Gustafsson has been hell-bent on redemption since that night, and on December 29th, he finally gets his chance when they meet once again in the year-ending blockbuster event. Hello and welcome to UFC Inside the Octagon. John Gooden back with Dan Hardy for our final show of 2018. And boy, are we going out with a bang. Dan, it's the rematch.
Finally.
232 is a crazy good event, but that main event is fire.
Finally. I mean, the first match, it was so interesting because it was a very tightly contested match.
Yep.
I think both fighters not only learnt a lot about each other, but about themselves in the fight. And then 5 years has passed and not been able to get their hands on each other. I feel like this is the perfect storm for one of the best fights that we've ever seen.
All the emojis.
All
right
of it.
now. All of the
Throw
emojis.
them all up on the page.
Well, for a big fight, we've got two pages for
course we
facts and stats. Let's just highlight these ridiculous physical attributes of both of these fighters.
That's the most important one for me because the only person that rivals it is Stefan Struve, 84.5-inch reach advantage.
And
Stefan
he's a
Struve has.
skyscraper.
Exactly. Whereas John Jones at 6'4", he actually gives up an inch in height to Gustafsson. But knowing the fact that he still had that reach advantage, I kind of feel like he underestimated how easy it was going to be for Gustafsson to hit him. You know, a lot of the times when John Jones is standing on the outside and he's picking people off at a distance, he can touch them when they can't reach him.
Yeah.
But Gustafsson was able to tag him several times, especially when Jones was kicking, Gustafsson was catching him with his hands, which I would imagine was very unusual for John Jones to be in that circumstance and took a lot of adapting in the fight, which is why he proved to be a champion on the night. Yeah.
And page 2 will show some incredible stats as well. And I like this one. Most wins, most finishes, most fight time in modern light heavyweight history. And he's not been incredibly active over the last few years.
And still, you know, the greatest number of significant strikes landed in light heavyweight history, which blows my mind considering now, you know, we've got Daniel Cormier holding the belt and he's just been lighting people up with a high volume of strikes. Yeah. The fact that John Jones is still holding that stat. I mean, you know, we can look at the stats on Gustafsson's side. We can celebrate them, of course. For me, the most important thing for Gustafsson are his performances. John Jones is clearing up the stats. He's got all of the accolades and the belts and everything like that. Gustafsson's just slightly behind him, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I kind of feel like this, certainly in his perspective, is his coming out party. This is his opportunity to finally get that win over Jones and position himself at the top of the tree.
Oh, dear. All right, well, their first fight was epic.
Yes.
They learned a lot about one another. And I guess more specifically, we learned a lot about them. You learned a lot about them. So let's start at that point, shall we?
I think we all learned a lot. And what I've done, I mean, I've taken 25 minutes and I've cut it down as much as I can. There was so much that happened. So bear with me. We're going to rattle through this. So this was very much a fight of two halves. The first 3 rounds in particular, for me, Gustafsson led them. And immediately you can see, this is the first exchange. Gustafsson's moving. He's lapping John Jones. He's doing circles of him around the octagon, constantly changing his angle, constantly moving in and out of range, really reaching as well for his shots to test John Jones's reactions and stuff. This also happened in the first round as well, which I know it was a glancing shot, but it caught John Jones clean enough to open him up. I mean, you can see what the skin does as the edge of the glove catches it.
First time he was ever cut in a UFC
look at that
as well.
It was just a whisker as well. He almost slipped out the way of the punch. But it changed his whole demeanour in that first round, especially when this happened. Because he's cut, he's getting outworked, he's struggling to get a bead on Alexander Gustafsson, and now all of a sudden he's been taken down. So he's got to finish the first round strong. So there's a bit of a panic in this last 10 seconds to make something happen, which was quite easy for Gustafsson to read and to deal with. because he's determining the pace of this fight. He's the one that's changing his angle. He's the one that's initiating a lot of these exchanges. And it made Jones quite uncomfortable. Jones is struggling to get a hand on him, struggling to keep a hold of him, but also struggling to figure out exactly what's working for him. I mean, the kicking started to work quite well. Then he started to have some success with elbows as well. And a few of these things he started to flesh out as the fight went on. He started to have more success with the elbows, more success with the kicks. But look at this. This is the end of the second round. So Gustafsson's in his corner, drinking his own water, checks over at Jones in the corner. That is what I call a 1,000-yard stare. Jones doesn't even look like he's conscious at that moment. He's so exhausted and overwhelmed by the circumstance that he wasn't even responsive to his corner team. But then he comes out third round. Obviously, he knows now the fight's slipping away from him. He's feeling this happen. He's feeling the belt, leaving his possession. And Gustafsson's still looking quite lively. He's still moving. He's still, he's still very active in his output. He's still catching John Jones, winning the majority of the punching exchanges. I mean, John Jones threw a lot of low kicks. I think 52 low kicks he threw in this fight. But nothing really seemed to slow Gustafsson down. If anything slowed Gustafsson down, it was his own work rate. It was Gustafsson trying to stay a step ahead of John Jones and forcing John Jones to work, but at the same time, there's an expense to that on yourself. I mean, if you look at these two guys as very similar physiologically, imagine they've got the same cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
I would say Gustafsson probably covered twice the distance that John Jones did. The output of the striking wasn't a great deal more than John Jones, but because he moved so much more, eventually it was going to have a toll on him.
Yeah.
Now, the fourth round, again, he started strong, winning the punching exchanges, but now started to get caught quite cleanly with kicks. John Jones then realises that once he's landed a kick, instead of stepping into punching range, he needs to step through and start cracking him with elbows. This is where he starts to have more success, because John Jones now, in my eyes, is either 2 or 3 rounds down, so he needs to make something happen. Now, this is just me speculating, but there seems to be a bit of a panic with John Jones when he realises he can't take the man down. I'll just pause that there for 1 second. Perfect time, look at that. I'm just going to point out, that's John Jones's eye line at the end of the fourth, checking the clock.
Yeah.
That's very important, and I'll tell you for why in a second. It almost feels like there's a bit of a panic to John Jones. If he can't take someone down, it's like in the back of his mind, he doesn't have that option. So it takes away a lot of his options on the feet. He doesn't seem quite as aggressive. He doesn't take the same risks, especially when he's been taken down. That was the first time in his career he's been taken down. So you've also got to bear in mind how that affects someone that is, he fights out of ego a lot of the time, or at least he was at this point in his career. Right? Absolutely. But then when you start having those chinks in your armour highlighted, that's when your psychological armour starts to fall apart. So he tried the spinning back elbow a couple of times. He looked up at the clock, last few seconds of the fourth round. This is big now. This, for me, is the most important strike in the whole fight. Bang.
Wa-boom.
And that reminds me of the final fight scene, Romeo Must Die, when Jet Li catches him on the top of the head and you see that spine all the way down, all the vertebrae smashing into each other.
Yeah.
That's what happened to Gustafsson in that moment. That spinning elbow, bang, right on the top side of the head. He felt that through his whole body. And he was just never able to get back into the fight from that point. He didn't even look himself in the rest of that round. John Jones knew, obviously, that was an impactful shot. He knew now he needed to put the foot on the gas, probably to try and get a finish. I mean, John still doesn't know what the judges are scoring. But the posture going back into the corners is very different at this point in the fight. So, end of the second round, Gustafsson's in his corner, he's having a drink, he's looking at his corner team, he's looking over at John. How's he looking? He looks tired, this is doing really well. John Jones is just staring out into space, getting cuts worked on, getting water poured in his mouth, doesn't really seem to be taking anything in. End of the fourth round, John Jones is walking back to his corner team, looking to his corner team for instruction. Gustafsson's looking at the floor. And as he walks back to his corner, I mean, look, there's a stagger there. He leans on the fence. I mean, obviously Jones has cut, but he's come through the worst of the fight now. He's started to turn the tables. So then all he did in the last round was focus on the things that he was successful with in the earlier rounds, mainly the kicking and the elbows. That's what he worked. He didn't really threaten too much with the takedowns in this round because he needed something more significant to happen. It was a bit too late for one takedown to win the fight. So he just threw head kicks over and over again. And I'll be honest, I think if he'd have thrown those head kicks in the first round, more than half of them wouldn't have even made contact with Gustafsson. I just feel like at this point, the toll of Gustafsson trying to stay ahead in those early rounds by staying on his bike, staying moving, staying mobile, had an impact on his cardio, and he just didn't have the energy to move out the way. He blocked every one of the kicks. Nothing caught him clean, but at the same time, he was still standing there to withstand the impact, which looks good on the judges' scorecards. I mean, head kicks through guard. Anthony Johnson knocked me off my feet and I blocked that head kick. You know, you can't really block a head kick. You still feel some of that impact. And I just feel like Gustafsson feels like he was almost there. I mean, honestly, if this was a 3-round fight, you can argue that Gustafsson won it. Yeah. And I would imagine that's been something in his mind going into this training camp.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, this has been on his mind for a long time. That is where the story began.
Yes.
And their paths very nearly crossed. I think there were some injuries.
Couple of times.
Other stuff happened, but it leads us to this point right now.
Yes. So this is the story so far. Now, there is a lot in this. We're going to rattle through this very quickly. So he's coming off that fight against John Jones. A few months later, he's in London facing Jimmy Manuwa before these guys were best buddies. And he just ran through him. Took him down one time beautifully, hit him with a knee, hit him with some uppercuts. Had a failed celebration as well.
I was going to say, a bad attempt at gymnastics.
The fight was beautiful. It was a very succinct performance, very clean. And he showed the things that worked well against Jones worked well against Jimmy as well. Jones is coming out to defend his belt the next time he's fighting Teixeira. But for me, what's important about this is that the whole fight against Gustafsson, he was struggling to reach him. Now he's fighting two guys who he has a clear height and reach advantage over, and he chooses to fight in the clinch. He's stepping into clinch range and going, I'm in your punching range now. What are you going to do about it?
That's a strange arrogance.
It is.
Especially when you've been taken to the wire in your previous fight and nearly lost everything.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
But this John Jones fighting in the clinch here is not the John Jones we saw against Gustafsson. And I think we're going to see much more of this against Gustafsson this time around. More hand fighting, more wrist control, more elbows, more head position. He did the same thing against Cormier. And even the way that he started the fight against Gustafsson, he was kind of on his feet, he was plodding a little bit, he was waiting. With Cormier, he came ready. I mean, this was a lively exchange right at the very start of the fight. And he knew for sure what he wanted to do against Cormier. I don't know whether that's because he was more aware of what Cormier was going to try and bring to the table, but John Jones was there to put it on Cormier, to make an example of him, and he did exactly that. And he beat him at every range. You know, he took him down, he beat him up at range with kicks, he beat him up in the clinch. It was a beautiful job. So then that puts Gustafsson in a situation where he's fighting Anthony Johnson. If he wins this fight against Anthony Johnson, he gets to fight Jones again. This is the first opportunity that just slips through his hands. And, well, it doesn't slip through his hands, it's punched out of his hands and into the front row of the Ericsson Globe Arena. I mean, we were there, this was early hours of the morning, and people didn't expect this.
It was silent.
It was silent and emptying out at early hours of the morning, and where you can see Gustafsson on his stool in a second, just completely dejected. That's a Gustafsson that's disappointed he's lost the fight, but even more disappointed because he's lost the opportunity that was in front of him.
Yep.
But then, you know, the stars aligned. John Jones was stripped of his title. DC beats Rumble for the belt, and now he's fighting Gustafsson. That's the only takedown he lands against Gustafsson. I think that's important. But Gustafsson tried to do the same thing he did against John Jones. Move away, circle, pick him off as he's moving in. But fascinatingly for me, Daniel Cormier did a much better job of keeping Gustafsson in the clinch than John Jones did. It was almost like John Jones didn't invest in that because he wasn't sure whether he was going to win that range. But now he's seen Daniel Cormier do it to Gustafsson. I guarantee that John Jones is going to do it. So now John Jones is back. He was supposed to fight Daniel Cormier. That didn't work out. Cormier was removed. OSP was put in. And it was a dominant performance. A lot of people said it was lackluster. People weren't happy with the performance. They felt like he was holding back somewhat. But when you can dominate another top 10 light heavyweight like he did with ease, made it look easy, which is why people were frustrated, because we've seen him challenged a little bit now. Yeah. We want to see him challenged again. He just absolutely rolled through OSP, but then again, has his belt taken away from him. So now Gustafsson's in a holding pattern again because he knows he can't get his hands on John Jones. So what he does, he lines up two perfect opponents. He lines up a Jan Blachowicz who he can take down, maul on the floor, beat up safely, didn't really step outside of his comfort zone in that one. And then Teixeira, a guy that he watched fight John Jones for 5 rounds and thought, I'm going to show John Jones what I can do to Teixeira, and absolutely did he put on a performance.
Beautiful.
I mean, footwork, all the things that you want to see against John Jones. Lateral movement, footwork, sharp hands, good eyes, good reaction times to everything that was coming back at him, slipping out the way, stepping around, changing his angles. It was a great performance, but it just seemed... go back and watch the fights. Go back and watch the finish of Teixeira and the win over Jan Blachowicz. Gustafsson doesn't even seem particularly bothered. Like, you watch the win over Manoa when he got back in the winning track and he was like, yes! He was like, I'm on my way back to the title. But with those 2 wins, his future was still uncertain because he didn't really want to rerun it with Cormier. He wants Jones. So it's almost like everything that's happened in the last 5 years has been him treading water and waiting to line that opportunity up again. So I can't imagine the pressure that's on his shoulders going into this training camp.
The ways in which they can win this fight, then.
Okay.
If we start with Gustafsson, what are you thinking of?
Same thing that he won the early rounds of the first fight with for me. He's got to be on his bike, he's got to move laterally. He's got to force John Jones to come to him. Because what we see in all of these fights is he changes his angle, his opponent walks to him, and then he catches him with a shot as they're walking onto it. So he's basically creating space between his opponent and allowing them to walk just into his range before he punishes them and then circle off. And because a lot of these guys are falling short when they're throwing shots, when they're in his range, it's quite comfortable for him. I think that's the change with John Jones, is that John Jones was able to catch him with some shots. But he rides the shots so well, he moves so well, he's very light, very mobile on his feet, and there's not a rhythm to it. You can't put a metronome to this and follow that footwork. It's constantly moving and changing. Because he's so fluid, he's so reactive. He knows roughly what he wants to do. I think he has certain key techniques that he wants to use. But for the most part, everything just kind of hinges on how his opponent interacts with his footwork. He forces them to come to him and he punishes them. I think the vulnerability that Cormier showed is that if you can stop him moving, then that's going to be the key. And whether that's keeping a hold of him, putting him on the floor, or taking his base away. He was the first person to take John Jones down. I think probably still the only person to take John Jones down. I think Cormier may have scored a takedown, but he was straight back to his feet.
Right.
Now, talking of ego-based fighters, if John Jones gets in this fight with ego in his mind, dictating his decisions, he's going to be so cautious of the takedown because he doesn't want that embarrassment of being taken down by a Swedish kickboxer.
Yeah.
That could be a narrative that Gustafsson can exploit. The feinting the takedowns and coupling them with his best technique, which is his uppercut. It seems to be something that's always found its home in his fights, no matter who he's facing. And if you go back through John Jones's fights, even since he's faced Gustafsson the first time, consistently he gets caught with uppercuts. I think it's because he stands square, I think it's because he reaches, and I think it's because his guard's so wide that anything coming around the sides is covered. But if something comes up the centre, he tends to eat it full force. DC was catching them with those shots. Obviously, Gustafsson caught him with a few as well. So I personally think that the lateral movement coupled with the threat of the takedown and the uppercut is going to be... They're the seeds that need to be planted early on in the fight for Gustafsson.
Just one little insider bit of information that I have. I went out to see Alex and they've identified that Jones did a really good job of winning the last minutes of those rounds when they first met. So I think they're focusing on trying to keep that pedal to the metal all the way through and just being a bit cautious in those seconds to make sure that they're winning on the scorecards as well.
Yeah.
Right, let's turn our attention to the man that many consider the GOAT for good reason. And you've just mentioned it, Dan, when talking about the percentage to gain. If we do see John Jones at 100%, oh my God, how good would this be? And what are we likely to see out of him?
Scary. I mean, a lot of this is speculative because Jones adapts his game and changes and adds so much to his game all the way through his career that, he's always showing us new things. The low kicks are going to be a big narrative in this one. He landed 51 in their first fight. I feel like, especially since this fight happened, the low calf kick's become a major weapon in the sport of mixed martial arts, and something that Jones used a little bit against Rampage. Not a great deal, not as much as I thought he might. I feel like if John Jones decides he wants to utilise that kick a lot more, I think it's going to be a real problem for Gus, who does stand long and he does plant his feet when he throws his punches, which means that John can cover and just keep digging that low calf kick in. And I do feel like that would to an extent nullify Gustafsson's movement, making him easier to hit. Now, something else that we've seen John Jones do a lot of the time is reach for his opponents. He tends to reach, he tends to grab wrists. Think to the Rashad Evans fight where he's coming over with elbows. a misunderstanding of the low calf kick is when you're throwing a low kick, you turn your hip over because you're coming down into the meat of the leg.
Yeah.
The low calf kick, it doesn't have to be that flamboyant.
Right.
It's literally just a dig.
So you don't have to drop your level.
Don't have to. Don't have to turn your hips over.
Right.
None of that. You can. So literally,
Cut
as
into
John
it.
Jones is reaching for those hands, he can just dig that in nice and low. And I think that's going to be a major weapon he's going to use in this fight. Something that Gustafsson's got to watch out for. And then when you think about his reaching for those hands, this is the first thing that comes to mind, is him stepping over the top and hitting with those elbows. I would say he's probably got the best elbows in MMA. I mean, there are a couple of guys that come close to him, but his creativity in the way he uses them is quite spectacular. I mean, that spinning elbow really was the turning point for me in that fight.
Yeah.
It was enough for me to score that round big enough for John Jones that it almost kind of cast a shadow on the first 3 rounds, and you kind of start going, well, was Gustafsson winning the fight up to that point? Because he looked so bad after that spinning elbow landed.
And the judges heard his spine sound like a xylophone.
Crack, 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 crack. Sound like my knuckles when I crack them. Yeah. I mean, this work on the inside, it's almost like he's making a statement. Like, I felt uncomfortable in this range against Gustafsson, so I'm going to force myself into this range against 2 guys that are shorter and should be better at this range, in Teixeira and DC. I feel like if he can start working those elbows early and step in through punching range to hit, he's going to either land something significant earlier on, which will change the course of the fight, like it did in the 4th round, or as he's stepping in, he's going to force Alexander Gustafsson to step out even further to get away from that attack, which means he's going to work even more.
Yeah.
So if Jones is in fact thinking the last minute of each round, I'm going to push hard, if he's made Gustafsson work even harder for those first 4 minutes of each round by stepping right into his range and making him uncomfortable, trying to tie him up, giving him flashbacks of the DC fight with those uppercuts that he kept eating, they're the things that are going to make him disengage and run around the octagon trying to get away from him.
Yeah.
And the things that are going to take away from his conditioning later in the fight.
One thing that we both find fascinating on a wider scale is fighter psychology of combat sports. It's difficult to sometimes illustrate, but it's so relevant for this particular contest, and I know that you've gone beyond looking at fight footage and now you're looking at interviews as well to try and glean where they're both at, and you found some stuff.
Well, this is where your specialism comes in. You do great sit-down interviews with these guys, and I like... Yeah, you can straighten your tie down, it's fine. I like to dig through these things and listen for key things, and this is... Something stood out to me at Gustafsson said.
If I lost the fight, I gained so much from it, and you know, first of all, I after the fight, I knew I had the right skills, and I'm on his level. You know, who knows if I step in, if I stepped into that cage, if I'm going to step into that cage in that octagon again against him and fight him again, I'm going to have that with me, that I know that he's not unbeatable. I know he bleeds. I know I can beat him.
See, that's massive. He said A, that he's on John Jones's level, which I think is the strongest psychological place that you have to be stepping in there.
Yep.
And B, that he knows that John Jones can be beaten, he can be cut, he can be hurt.
Yep.
He's seen John Jones rattled, he's seen John Jones tired. So all of the things that would give him confidence going into a rematch are already there. The only question is whether that John Jones that he saw 5 years ago is a realistic perspective of who John Jones actually is as a fighter.
Right.
Because the rumours in and around the training camp is that he wasn't really doing a great deal of work for that fight. If that's true, not only is that amazing that he was able to do 25 minutes in one of the best fights we've seen, but that also means that Gustafsson may have only seen 50, 60, 70, 80% of John Jones.
Everything he's hanging on to
might not be there. It might crumble in the first round.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. And then the John Jones that we've seen of recent months as well is not the John Jones that faced Gustafsson in the past.
Yeah.
The John Jones that faced Gustafsson in the past was a fighter that was living in his ego, that was trying to play the good guy. And we all know that John Jones is not the good guy anymore. And I think it's important that it at least comes to terms with that part of his character.
Yeah.
Because then you can start to address it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say on top of that from Alex and conversations with him is that he said it's more important for him to beat Jones than win the belt. Like, that's crazy to me in some respects. But let's get straight into this point about Jones then and embracing the heel, because if you're trying to be something that you're not, it goes against your internal flow, right?
For sure.
And I think you've kind of identified something with this.
I think if you suppress something, it's going to come out in a negative way. If you're a fat kid at heart and you want to eat sweets and chocolate all the time, and you suppress that all the way through training camp, as soon as the weigh-in's done or the fights is done, depending on the fighter's discipline, they're smashing chocolate chip cookies left, right, and centre. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's a swing, there's a backswing. Yeah. And John Jones's backswing of being the good guy is being reckless at other times. if he can at least accept that that's a part of his personality and just be the bad guy. Nick Pete's always saying it on the Fight Disciples podcast. Just be the bad guy. Be this guy that drops Quinton Jackson on the floor at the end of the round because he just didn't need to finish the takedown. Or the guy that leaves one of the greatest fighters of all time slumped against the canvas because he just choked him out and walked off nonchalantly. Like, this is the guy that John Jones is. DC brought the genuine John Jones out. And honestly, this is the guy that sells tickets. This is the guy that people want to watch. Look at that. That's a feral John Jones. That's a John Jones that if he steps in the octagon against you, if he's got those eyes on, it's a bad night for you. Because he's not only effective, but he's mean. And I think that is an added string to his bow, which, look at this. Perfectly legal shots from John Jones. It was Cormier that was thrown back after the bell there. I mean, he is the bad guy. Even, you know, when he got the belt back, as Cormier was commentating, that was the interim title that he won against OSP. Like, in recent interviews, particularly the press conference where somebody mentions about him drinking and stuff, he's like, yeah, I still drink. Like, it's almost like he's accepted that part of himself, that this is who I am. I'm going to find a small home for this so it doesn't take over my whole career. And so let's look at this. Look, Gustafsson's really happy to be there. He's happy that he's got this opportunity. John Jones is looking at him like, you aren't even worth fighting. I've beaten you once before. You didn't even get a great version of me. Now I'm going to really show you what John Jones is about. And watch it. Look at that. Watch how he steps in front of him. I mean, Gustafsson plays the game, obviously, there, but that bad boy John Jones is the John Jones that I think we can kind of grow to, A, forgive for his misdemeanours, and B, come to love because he's quite entertaining. I feel like he has to embrace the heel in this role because Gustafsson's not the bad guy. He can't be the bad guy.
No.
He was celebrated because of the performance he put on against John Jones in the first place.
Went on to win the EA Sports cover after that fight. It changed his life.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you just said this about the misdemeanours. Can he truly be considered the greatest of all time despite everything he's done?
It depends what
outside of the octagon.
It depends how you define the greatest of all time. Is the greatest of all time a combination of athletic achievements and character outside of the competition area? Because I don't think it is. If we're talking about the greatest of all time, we're trying to find the best mixed martial artist of all time. Even if they're a terrible person all the rest of the time, if their achievements are undeniable in the octagon, that's what we're focusing on. I think a lot of people, when they go, oh, greatest of all time, and then we're comparing the likes of Muhammad Ali, who was not only a great individual outside of the ring, but a great fighter in the ring, it gets very different. It gets very difficult there because we're not comparing John Jones's character. He's fallen at that first hurdle. But as far as being the best mixed martial artist on the planet, absolutely he can be.
Yeah.
However, if Gus beats him, so can Gus.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest. Absolutely you can. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if John Jones loses to Gus, then we get DC coming back down to rematch Gus, or Gus moving up to contend at heavyweight. I mean, the storylines that come off at this was like a spider diagram in my brain. It just goes in 100 directions. And it doesn't really matter who wins because it's going to be a great fight regardless. It's going to be a great fight. And one thing I will say is going out to Sweden and spending time with Alex, I've never seen him so relaxed and excited. A beautiful combination because you would think with the pressure of this fight, he would be a bit angsty, but he's not. And I'm really interested to see how that translates. I'm so pleased we get to see this fight again. I think there's a lot more certainty in his life now as well. He's settled. He's got a family. I think his foundation's stronger than it was before.
For sure.
Great time.
Everything is there. It's all made. Everything's aligned, and it's the last one of the year. What a way to go out on 2018, Dan. Thank you for all the analysis this year. We will be back in 2019. Continue the conversation in the comments section below. Use the handle @UFC Europe, the hashtag Inside the Octagon, and we will see you next time. Enjoy the fights.